The San Francisco Law Library is open to anyone. We offer free access to Westlaw, Lexis, Bloomberg, and other databases, and can help you with reference assistance. And I'll now introduce our director, Diane Rodriguez.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I'm Diane Rodriguez, the director of the Law Library, and it is my honor to introduce our speaker today, Ron Gieseke. I had the pleasure of meeting Ron in Chicago a few years ago through law librarian colleagues at the Chicago-Kent College of Law. Ron is the perfect blend of some of my favorite things, baseball and the law. Ron is a senior attorney with 30 plus years of corporate in-house legal experience. He retired in 2016 from active practice as director, corporate, and assistant general counsel of Amarin Corporation in St. Louis. He received his Bachelor of Arts in Economics at Northwestern University and his JD at the Washington University School of Law. He's a member of the Illinois and Missouri bars. Post-retirement, Ron began teaching in 2017 at the Chicago-Kent College of Law, where he now serves as a senior lecturer. In addition, Ron currently is an adjunct professor at the University of Illinois Chicago School of Law, an arbitrator for the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority and the Better Business Bureau, and he's a mediator for the Center for Conflict Resolution in Chicago. Ron, you're a busy guy. For the past 8 years, Ron is the author of a blog called The Baseball Bench Coach, which I'll put a link to in a moment in the chat, which provides baseball insight every Monday morning during the baseball season. A book of the same name was published in 2005, which I have a copy and I recommend highly. He's a frequent speaker on baseball topics, and Ron has also served as a tour guide at Wrigley Field for the past 9 seasons. I was fortunate enough to attend one of his tours, which was fantastic, and I highly recommend it if you're in Chicago. So please join me in welcoming Ron Gieseke. Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Diane, for that very kind introduction. And good afternoon, everybody. I'm sure that many of you can't miss the opportunity of getting CLE for law and its combination with baseball. As Diane mentioned, two of my favorite topics as well. So let me start off with this disclaimer. Any rebroadcast, retransmission, or account of this seminar without the express written consent of Major League Baseball is prohibited. I hope some of you might be chuckling with that introduction. That is the disclaimer that we've heard for decades in Major League Baseball with respect to broadcast. But there are a couple of disclaimers for the seminar today that I do want to express, and one is that my opinion in this or presentation and opinion in this seminar is solely mine. It's not the opinion of Chicago-Kent College of Law, nor is it the opinion of the Chicago Cubs in any way. So I just wanted to kind of get that out in the way. And as Aaron mentioned, questions can be presented in the chat. Some of you, I'm sure, done presentations on Zoom before. It's always kind of a two-handed task to be presenting at the same time, be always checking the chat room. But I will do that, and hopefully with the assistance of Aaron, be able to field some questions along the way. But we will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, or you can just um, you know ask a question orally throughout the seminar today. I'd be happy to entertain those as well. I think, Diane, for my background, so we'll go to the next slide, a little bit about my background in addition to what the things that Diane had mentioned. I think my wife calls me the busiest retiree ever. And I have done a lot, not only being able to blend kind of my love of the law to the classroom for students, but also do some fun things as well, and that's in baseball. I had this idea about 9 years ago that I'd write what I thought was going to be kind of like a Monday morning quarterback of baseball topics. My idea was that I would watch a lot of baseball during the week, and then that weekend I would write about things that a manager did wrong or did correctly, and then I would discuss them on Monday. When you think about that, that's a very tall task, and it's a task that was something that I thought was a good idea. But then I quickly got into my blog and I changed gears. And what my baseball blog is basically looking at a current baseball topic and giving the history of the topic, as well as adding some personal touches, some personal anecdotes. I played baseball for much of my life, and also then kind of giving my thoughts on the current topic. And it's short and sweet. It's a very easy, less than 5 minute read. I do them every Monday morning. They come out during the regular season. I think I've now written 192 blogs. That's a lot of writing. My pen is starting to get a little dry, but baseball always has issues. And one of those issues, of course, is today's topic. Um, as Diane mentioned, she and a couple of others of you were on a tour of Wrigley with me, and one of the pieces of the tour that I love to tell that not everybody knows is that Wrigley Field in Chicago was not built for the Chicago Cubs. It was actually built for a team in the Federal League. And at the time when baseball was early 1900s, there were lots of offshoot leagues, lots of leagues that were framed to kind of handle the interest in baseball players. The National League was founded in 1876 and the American League was founded in 1902. But in this interim period over the next 20 years, in the beginning of the 20th century, there were all sorts of other leagues. And one of them was the Federal League. And so the original owner of the Cubs, who actually brought the Cubs to what he called Wigman Park, was a gentleman named Charlie Wigman. And Charlie owned the Chicago Federals. And we like to tell the joke at Wrigley all the time, calling a team the Federals in the Federal League is about as original as calling a team the Nationals in the National League. It just doesn't work very well. But Charlie's Federal League team had some great success in 1915. They won the Federal League championship. And then things went awry. The Federal League folded at the end of the 1915 season, and the owners of that league then were scrambling to try and get ownership in other sorts of baseball interests. And that's really where the story begins. And that in the first case, that is probably the landmark case in baseball. And that, let's go to the next slide, the baseball antitrust exemption. So the case that was decided in 1922, it's called the Federal Baseball Club versus the National League. It actually is about another Federal League team. So most of the Federal League owners found their place in other parts of baseball, or they were compensated. For example, the owner of the St. Louis Terriers of the Federal League, they became the St. Louis Browns of the American League. The Browns then became the Baltimore Orioles in the 1950s. And also the owner of the Chicago team, which eventually became the Chicago Whales, not the Federals, that was Charlie Wigman, and he got majority ownership of the Cubs in 1916. But one of the owners was the owner of the Baltimore Terrapins. And because he had not been compensated and not receive an interest in any other major league team, He sued the National League and the American League and the other defendants, including the majority owners of the respective clubs, for conspiring to monopolize baseball by destroying the Federal League. And that's where this case finds its fact scenario. It was a unanimous decision. It was written by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, as we all know. And the basic holding was that baseball was not interstate commerce for purposes of the Sherman Act. And kind of uniquely in the opinion, Justice Holmes wrote that the business is giving exhibitions of baseball, which are purely state affairs. Now, this is at a time when a league had baseball teams in states across the eastern coast and the Midwest, and they were traveling across state lines to engage in these exhibitions of baseball. But Justice Holmes and the entire court actually found that baseball was exempt under the Sherman Act. And this case is the main reason why that Major League Baseball has not faced any competitor leagues really since 1922. And to date, that the Major League Baseball remains the only American sports league with an antitrust exemption. There was another case that was decided about 30 years later, and that was the Toulson versus New York Yankees. Now we're in the early 1950s, and in this fact scenario, a pitcher for an affiliate of the Yankees, his name was George Toulson. He was playing for a team called the Newark Bears in 1949, which is a AAA team for the Yankees. And due to the reserve clause in his contract and every player's contract, and a reserve clause is where the team reserves the rights to a player for a year, and then that right then extends from year to year. He was, in his words, effectively bound by the Yankees, and he could not contract with another team. The Yankees was a team full of talent, and he thought he had major league talent, wanted to go elsewhere. When the Newark franchise dissolved, he filed suit. In fact, he was first demoted by the Yankees to another team, and then he filed suit against the Yankees in Major League Baseball. And now this is at a time in the early 1950s when clearly there was interstate commerce with respect to baseball, because baseball has now grown in popularity, and you're finding it on radio and on television, broadcasts of games throughout the country, and basically the interstate aspects of baseball were pretty well clear. Before the case was ultimately decided by the Supreme Court, there was an attempt by Congress to actually resolve this, the baseball antitrust exemption. In fact, in 1951, one of the congressmen actually started or was the chair of this special enforcement committee. It's a judiciary committee, I should say, and they're looking at whether or not by legislation Congress should indeed no longer provide for this baseball antitrust exemption. There are some star players who actually testified before Congress, and many of them took some really conflicting opinions. You might know the name, if you're a baseball old timer, Pee Wee Reese. He actually had some interesting testimony before the Judiciary Committee, and basically he was there to support the reserve clause, which was kind of an unusual position for the players, but he was expressing that as kind of a league-wide opinion. And finally, the Judiciary Committee issued a report that Congress shouldn't take any actions. And so basically, they went back to the federal courts. And in 1952, again, Justice, I'm sorry, in 1952, the decision was, again, that the 1922 decision of Justice Holmes and the Supreme Court would be sustained. And so we had the president, again, of this baseball antitrust exemption. So that's a little bit of the background. Let's move on to the next slide where we talk about the reserve clause in more detail. If you're a baseball, someone who's kind of footed in baseball history, you'll know the name of Curt Flood. Just to kind of show my age, I grew up first learning baseball in the 1960s, and my father was a huge baseball fan. And during that time, the World Series was conducted solely during the day. So they would play the first two games on the weekend, and then they would have Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday afternoon games. My father would take vacation during the week to see those World Series games. And when I'd get home from school, I'd sit by his side and we'd watch the World Series. And during the 60s, one of the teams in the National League that was certainly a standout team was the St. Louis Cardinals. They won the National League in 64, 67, and 68. And their center fielder, Curt Flood, was one of the star players in that team. Well, he was traded after the 69 season to the Philadelphia Phillies, and he challenged the trade. He refused the trade, and he requested that he would be made a free agent, and he challenged the reserve clause. And that's really what started kind of the avalanche of kind of chipping away of the antitrust exemption, and also the chipping away of the reserve clause, and brought us free agency in baseball. What Curt Flood initially did was reach out to the then executive director of the Major League Baseball Players Association. You may know the name Marvin Miller. Marvin Miller basically flat out told Flood that this is a loser. You're not going to be able to pursue this case. It's going to be financially difficult for you, and you're not going to win this case. But Flood got the assistance of counsel. Okay. And so he actually hired counsel, very famous lawyer Alan Zerman, who represented him in the case. And Zerman took it through the court system, and they lost at the federal district level. They lost at the appeals level, and part of the ongoing narrative was the introduction of Bowie Kuhn, who was the commissioner at the time, into the discussion. Bowie Kuhn was always kind of an advocate of free agency and what it might mean to baseball. You often hear of baseball commissioners in particular, being kind of the owners on the owner's side of the table. Kuhn was very, I think, very helpful to free agents because he knew that it was something that was going to come down the pike. The actual decision in Flood versus Kuhn that was issued in 1972 was written by one of the justices, Justice Blackmun, and it's kind of an interesting story as to how he got the case. I'm sure all you know that usually when the Supreme Court decides, who has the majority stance, they then appoint someone who is who's in the majority to write the decision. And the reason that Blackmun got the case to write was that he was a huge baseball fan, and all the other judges turned to him. Okay, you write this decision because this is what you love. And if you ever want to read just a great history of baseball, going back to the 1800s and how it got to the court at that time. You should read part one of Flood versus Kuhn. It's just a wonderful opinion or at least a wonderful baseball story that he unwinds during his opinion. One of the interesting parts of the case was that Flood and his team, up to the Supreme Court decision, they just did not do well in terms of testimony. Otherwise, Flood actually was not that very forthright and or this passionate about the reserve clause. He owned another business in St. Louis, and that turns out that was really one of the reasons he wanted to stay in St. Louis. Flood is kind of paraded or heralded as the defender of the reserve clause, but there was a lot more to it behind the scenes. So anyway, the Flood versus Kuhn was decided, and Flood set out the season in '71 prior to the case being finally decided, and he never really played in baseball again. I think he played for a very short time with the Washington Senators and called it a career. But his name will forever go down as one of the the leaders of the reserve clause. All right, so let's go to the next slide, aftermath. I'm looking at the chat room to see if I have anything. I see some greetings. Okay. So the Major League Baseball Players Association began to put some pressure on Major League Baseball to actually create free agency. And one of the cases was an arbitration case decided in 1975, and it was before Bowie Kuhn, and it ended in a settlement that basically created free agency, which really was much to the pleasure of Kuhn. MLBPA was represented by Marvin Miller. You might know the names of Messersmith and McNally. Andy Messersmith was one of the great pitchers of the time, and Jim McNally also a great pitcher for the Baltimore Orioles. So we had the establishment of free agency, but we still had this cloud hanging over, and that's this baseball antitrust exemption and how it might impact the players. And all along, the court systems, and most particularly the Supreme Court, was saying, "Listen, this is a matter for the legislature. We have precedent in our Supreme Court history on this exemption, but if you want to change it, you should change it through through Congress." And that's why in 1998, the Curt Flood Act of 1998 became kind of center stage. The Curt Flood Act amended the Clayton Antitrust Act to give the ML players the right to sue in federal court over antitrust labor issues. Basically, what the 98 Act did was kind of create this exception to the exemption for employment issues of players, but left intact was any sort of antitrust concerns relating to minor league players or any sort of expansion of franchises or relocation of franchises or broadcasting rights. All of that is still part of baseball's antitrust exemption. The Curt Flood Act was kind of just one little exception to the exemption. We've had some even recent challenges, as you can see here. In October of 25, the First Circuit Court of Appeals heard a case, and they upheld the exemption against the challenge that was made by minor league players. Again, the exemption's in play. And then just recently in March, the Supreme Court declined to hear a case that was really the centerpiece of it. It was the termination of a franchise in Puerto Rico. So it's still in place, essentially, as we sit here today. Um, let's go to the next slide. So, Major League Baseball Players Association and Major League Baseball really began to lock horns in the 1970s. The first big strike was in 1972. It was a 13-day strike. Basically, the strike concerned the players' pension fund. The end result really was that there was a monetary settlement where Major League Baseball would increase the pension fund by like $500,000. But what they also did, actually, coming out of that strike, was that they created salary arbitration in baseball. If you do any sort of arbitration, you might always hear the term the baseball arbitration. And what that is that the player comes to the arbitration table with a figure in mind or a figure that's set out, and the team comes to the table with a figure, and you cannot actually find an arbitrator can't find himself or herself in the middle, but rather has to select one of those two numbers. And that's been going on all the way since the mid 1970s. In 1976 was really the first time free agency was put in play. We starting to see some movement by players. I think one of my favorite stories, again, of my father, he was a Cincinnati Reds fan true and through, and Pete Rose left the Reds. In a contract dispute and was one of the hottest free agents in baseball, and he signed with the Phillies. And I remember calling my dad that day, and he quickly said that he's thankful that Rose signed with a National League team he gets to see Rose play in person. I thought that was a funny way of looking at of that signing. Um, the one note that I mentioned on this slide that was also very interesting is that baseball dealt with the season in 1972 in a very odd way. Since the strike canceled many games, it created an uneven schedule for the teams. And the Detroit Tigers played actually one more game in the American League East than the Red Sox. And because that, they won the AL East by over Boston by a half a game, and it held. It was a very interesting way of kind of resolving the strike on the field. And there was a couple other work stoppages in the 70s. There was a February 1973 lockout and a March 1976 lockout of the players, both of which were very short time. It was during spring training, and it interfered with some of the spring training games, but no regular season games were canceled. All right, let's go on to the next slide, the 1981 strike. In 1981, we had a major strike by the players. I think one of the ways to set the stage for this, I was actually I was married in late June of 1981. We're going to celebrate our 45th coming up, and I was a baseball guy, and so my wife and I honeymooned in Tennessee, and on our way back home, I had to stop at a minor league game in Paducah, Kentucky, because I had this thirst for seeing baseball because it was during a strike that started on June 12th and went all the way into the end of July. It basically canceled over 50 games, over 50 games by each team, a third of the season. The compromise of this strike was that any team who had lost what they deemed a premium free agent could grab a player that was left unprotected from all the MLB teams, and not just the signing team. So it kind of opened up the doors in terms of what could be available and how an impacted team could actually kind of have its stake in getting and fortifying its team. the on the playing field, the compromise was also kind of interesting because what the MLB decided to do was to play two split seasons, so that there were basically two tournaments, or two sets of regular season play, ending in a winner in the respective divisions. And so teams that actually had records overall that were better than some of the other teams, they included the White Sox and the Reds and the Cardinals, they actually overall won more games than other teams in their division. They were not eligible for the playoff. So the winner of the 1981 World Series, I think, will always go into doubt in terms of who was the best team during 1981. But I think overall, and most importantly, what that strike did was really, for the first time, put a real scar on baseball. It impacted attendance. The typical, if the games, if they're not going to play these games for these high paid players, why should I watch them going forward? Those kinds of things. And baseball was basically on its heels for many years after the 1981 strike. It really impacted the bottom line of baseball. All right. I am doing a lot of talking. Any questions at this point? Okay. So let's go to the next slide, the 1990s and some more labor turmoil. In 1990, the Major League Baseball locked out the players for 32 days, beginning in February. And again, this is another time that spring training was impacted. This one actually eliminated spring training. The season began a week later than it was scheduled, but this time MLB played all 162 game season for all the teams. The owners were seeking a revenue sharing plan. Basically, the players, there'd be 48% of the players' salaries would be paid from this revenue sharing plan. And it was the first time in baseball that a salary cap had been proposed. And really wasn't something that was given a lot of weight. Ultimately, the parties agreed to this, do a study, the infamous or the dreaded forming of a committee that comes out of any stalemate of negotiations, which basically just punted and put it aside. About 4 years later, in 1994, baseball actually began its longest work stoppage ever. And this was a strike that began on August 12, 1994, and baseball did not resume until over 235 days later in April of 1995. I'm sure many of you remember remember those days, the fall of 1994, when for the first time ever, so literally since the early 1900s, we did not have a World Series. And the 1995 season then was also impacted. It was reduced to a 144 game schedule. The actual cancellation of the World Series was a very big deal. And just to kind of express some of the points that were made in that particular strike, the core issue, or I'm sorry, that particular lockout, the core issue was really the owners' continuing desire to impose a salary cap. This was 30 years ago, and we still don't have anything resolved. It's really at the core of the conflict between the MLBPA and Major League Baseball today. All right, so we can go to the next slide, Aaron. So let's fast forward from the 90s and to we do have, has the U.S. Congress considered legislation regarding MLB's judicially created antitrust exemption? So that's been the play all along. I mean, I think there's been legislation that has been proposed over time and never really got much footing. The only thing that we've had, of course, was the Curt Flood Act, which took a piece of it, but only with respect to employment rights. Okay, so let's go to the 2021-22 lockout. The players, the contracts are now in 5-year terms. They end at midnight on December 21. I'm sorry, they end up midnight on December 1st, and the contract that ended on December 1st, 2021, the owners immediately locked out the players. It was after many months of negotiations that were really not going anywhere. There's a lot of parallels between this period 5 years ago and today, because in the months prior to the lockout, the owners were scrambling to sign players because they were fearful of a major work stoppage, and so they were trying to kind of beat the Players Association to the point of, okay, let's sign some of the major players so that we as a team can be better protected. It was kind of a wild scrambling of free agent signings. There's over $1.9 billion spent in November of 2021 on free agent contracts. The dispute concerned compensation for young players and the owner's demand to narrow the disparity of each team's combined salary with a minimum of $100 million per team and an incremental luxury tax beginning at $180 million. The lockout lasted about 3 months. It shortened spring training and it rescheduled the first 2 weeks of the season to later dates. They actually played a season in 22, which was very heavy on the back end. Oftentimes, you see baseball having be like the first month of the season, they'll have some, an off day schedule, a day each week because they're anticipating some rain impacts, and maybe as the season goes on, a little less days off. But the last month and a half of the 22 season was jam-packed baseball games, including for the first time actual scheduled doubleheaders, which we hadn't seen in quite some time. In the actual settlement to the last lockout, the league minimum salaries were increased by 23%, but there was really no progress on the team's combined salary concerns. There was an incremental luxury tax that was instituted, and it became actually very important in this process. It was instituted at a higher level than proposed. It actually topped off this year at $242 million, meaning that a Major League Baseball team, if they have annual team salaries of over $242 million, they have to pay an additional tax to Major League Baseball. All right. So that's kind of sets the stage for where we're going out now. I do want to go to the next slide, Aaron. Let's talk a little bit about how this plays into other professional sports. Major League Baseball is the only one who doesn't have a real salary cap. And there's kind of a difference in salary caps. There's a hard cap. And if many of you are sports fans, probably the most recognized one is the NFL, where every team in the NFL cannot exceed a certain amount of money paid to its players. And it's almost by positional. I mean, there's when players are drafted now, based on where they're drafted, they're slotted for so much money. It's pretty firm and intact in terms of trying to even the playing field for the NFL, the 32 different teams. The NBA has what I guess is more of a soft cap that does require that if you do go over the cap, you do pay what they also have is a luxury cap. The NBA also has was kind of the exchange of contracts, meaning that in order for players to be traded, they have to be traded for players of comparable contracts. You often see um, 3 and 4 way trades in the NBA, where one of the teams is not even getting a notable player at all, but they're just trying to deal contracts in this so that they can kind of line up with the salary cap structure. Again, the Major League Baseball doesn't have any hard cap. It utilizes this competitive balance cap, and which is called a luxury tax. Let's take a look at where we are in terms of why this is such an important issue. Aaron, why don't you go to the next slide? It's the team payrolls. Yeah, so this is where we are. I mean, if you may be a this is I know in the California bar we may have some Dodger fans here. So raise your electronic hand if you're a Dodger fan. And we got some couple. All right. So the look at the Dodgers salary. This is actually through a source called Spot Track. The Dodgers team payroll in 2026. I like Diane said this is Giants territory. Well, uh, the I always tell when I do tours at Wrigley Field, there's always seems to be Dodger fans. Sometimes I have Giants fans. I just try and keep them apart. But the Dodgers, are coming in with over $415 million of salary. Based on the luxury tax, they can afford, paying the luxury tax. And then the Mets and the Yankees and the Phillies and the Blue Jays, they're all, upper tier of these in these exceeding the luxury tax. But basically it's like it's not impacting them because the revenue sources are just so much higher in other areas that they can pay the luxury tax. It doesn't matter as much. And then you have the lower revenue teams in not as populated areas. Actually, one of those is an exception, is Chicago White Sox, the third largest city in the country, but the American League team, the White Sox, has an owner that really is not a big believer in high salaries for the players. In fact, has never signed a contract with a player for over $100 million. Just never has done it. But then you have the Cardinals and Tampa Bay and the White Sox and the Guardians and the Marlins, kind of all on that lower side of the spectrum. There's a great disparity. There's certainly disparity in payrolls. Let's go to the next slide. Actually, I know that before we do this, before we go to the next slide, Aaron, why don't you go back to that payrolls? So what's interesting about these payrolls is that if you look at the standings, and I pulled the standings from baseball this morning, which I love to do. And top of the American League East is the 27th payroll team, the Tampa Bay Rays. They have the best record in baseball right now at 33-15. I know I just saw a comment in a chat about the Guardians. Yeah, they're actually leading the American League Central, followed by the White Sox. I mean, these names are becoming familiar. And in second place in the National League Central is the St. Louis Cardinals. So this is kind of does it really matter, right? That kind of approach. I find it somewhat ironic in today's game that we're seeing this kind of a separate aside. I have found that baseball is starting to return to what I call small ball, advancing runners, bunting, those kinds of things, which is helpful for teams that are on the lower salary side. All right, so let's go to the next slide. So I call this a dark cloud because everybody in baseball that you talk to is knowing that this cloud is going to be all-encompassing sometime later this year when the contract expires at midnight on December 1st later this year. It almost seems inevitable. Last summer, Commissioner Manfred actually toured the clubhouses of many MLB teams, and it was a story that was told much in the media that one of the when he was with the Phillies that Bryce Harper actually basically said it's a non-starter having any sort of a salary cap in baseball, and it would be worth losing a season to fight it off. Um, so while the Players Association opposes the cap, the actual union, the Players Association, that does support some sort of a salary floor, of course, because some of these teams, the ones that are on the lower rung, need to be competitive and to pay higher salaries. So it would force those lower revenue teams to spend more. There have been some happenings, I guess, over the last couple of weeks, some updates that I think are interesting in light of what we're going to see at the end of the season. 2 weeks ago in New York, the Major League Baseball and the Players Association had its initial session. Apparently, it took a couple hours. It was kind of a non-event. Both sides presented initial presentations, and each side and each of their views on the economics of the sport as it now exists. There's going to be an 8-player committee that's representing the Players Association, led by the Mets infielder who came from the Texas Rangers in the offseason, a guy named Marcus Semien, and he's going to be a member of the executive committee of the Players Association. He brought to the meeting some players not on the committee, included some of his Mets teammates, and the Mets happened to be playing the Tigers at the time, so there's some Tiger players that were in town as well. And on behalf of the Major League Baseball, uh, the lead negotiator will be Bruce Meyer, as you probably saw in the news in February that Tony Clark, was a former player and was the executive director of Major League Baseball, was forced to resign, and Bruce Meyer is leading the union negotiations for the team with the player committee. The actual deputy commissioner, Dan Hallam, is heading Major League Baseball's negotiations team. He did that in the last two agreements, but now Tony Clark, who's with the union, he resigned from the Players Association in February. Bottom line is that the union maintains that a cap system will decrease spending on players, and they're not going to agree to it as they sit here today. While management argues that a cap and a floor would benefit most players and certainly the game of baseball. So we're going to see where this standstill results. So let's go to the next slide, planning ahead. We see some of the same kind of things going on this year that we saw in prior years in terms of gearing up for it. You might have noticed some signings of players, and a lot of these are by the lower market teams. That the Brewers signed their star player, Cooper Pratt, who's never played a game in Major League Baseball, to an 8-year deal. The Seattle Mariners signed Colt Emerson. Also, you don't know the name, but it's going to be a star, to a big deal. The Pirates brought up Connor Griffin about 5 weeks ago, who's playing exceptionally well for Pittsburgh. He was signed to a 9-year deal. So these owners are getting some firm commitments from players before the possibility of a work stoppage. A lot of the free agent contracts expire at the end of this season. There's a lot of players that are signed just through 2026. The owners have foreseen this coming. And in fact, there's a couple players in the news today that are everybody's wondering what's going to happen. The two April stars in the American League and National League rookies, one Murakami with the White Sox and the other South Stewart with the Reds. There's rumblings that the teams need to sign them as well before we head into the real dark cloud. Let's go to the final slide. So finally, possible solution. I think this is not something that's creative, but you hear this a lot. Explore a hard cap and a floor at the same time. Looking at just sort of thinking back to that chart I just put up, some sort of a maximum cap of 280 million actually fits well into the current spending, and a floor of 140 million, which would also, be just above where a lot of the teams, or I think 11 of the teams are, would also be a good landing point. That's what everybody from the outside looking in is thinking where you might be heading. The If you'd have a $280 million cap, it might only affect the five teams, the ones that I had put on previously. They'd have to pay some sort of a luxury tax. But in terms of the floor, it would push some other teams to have some more competitive salaries for their players, and maybe a good landing point. All right, that is the bulk of the presentation. I now kind of want to open it up to questions, and Aaron, if you could help me field some of these questions. Yeah, I see in the chat room that Marvin Millian is indeed in Cooperstown. All right, questions from the group. I know this is Giants territory. What do you think about the Dodgers in this respect?
Well, I'll get it started on that one. Highly competitive. It's just crazy how much money they have, but they did have some good results as a with all that spending. But I'm just wondering, like, with the way that this is going, who do you think is going to come to the table to negotiate all of these terms when the dark cloud emerges?
Yeah, it's a tough question. I mean, it just seems that both sides are the given is that we're going to lose spring training next year. I mean, almost think that that's a given at this point. It's really hard to foresee that not happening. But how that will extend into next season, and how it might impact the game from a fan standpoint, that's territory they were in 1981, and it was not a good result. Are the owners willing to forsake a season? Are the players willing to lose a season of compensation when this is what their livelihood is doing? They're going to be making money in this 5 to 10 year period of their life that sets them, for the rest of their life. I mean, who's willing to blink? I wish I had the answer to that, but right now it just seems like it's two sides that are pretty far apart.
So sad. It's going to be, I don't know. I'm bracing myself. I don't know if I can handle it. But there are a couple of more questions in the chat. Kent is asking, with Marvin Miller being in Cooperstown, do you think the Veterans Committee will conduct Curt Flood someday for the same reason?
Yeah.
Well, induct. I'm sorry, induct. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's been chatter about that in the past. It just never had gotten any grounding. But the Veterans Committee, just for everybody's the vision of what it is, after the player is 15 years out from its when they played, One of the there's a separate group that elects or nominates and elects players into the hall. Um, Compared to other sports, professional sports halls of fame, baseball is very selective. In fact, first ballot Hall of Famers are, not maybe there's just one or two a year, that kind of thing. It's tough to get in the Hall of Fame, and I'd say that as a prelude. Only I think it's going to be that's a tough pull for Kurt Flood as well. So I don't know the answer. I know there's been rumblings, but I just don't know if that's going to happen. I see the other one. Do you think the labor negotiations will take up consideration of more nuanced changes, capping team non-salary cap expenses? One thing that is kind of underlying the baseball's concerns right now is broadcasting. And one of the reasons the Yankees and the Dodgers have such an advantage is that their ability to have these exclusive rights to the broadcasts, and where other teams were part of kind of regional networks, and many of which have failed, these regional networks. And so Major League Baseball is actually this year and some of last year is starting to have to take on the broadcasting rights to some of these teams. And with that is, of course, reduced revenue. That might be, I'm not sure it's a nuanced change, but that's got to be also at the forefront of this is like, where's the revenue coming in? I mean, it's to force a lower revenue team to go up to a certain player salary rank. Well, how do we exist in this world when we don't have the magic of some of these other big networks? Here's a question. This might be a bit silly to ask, but do you think the rise of the Savannah Bananas enterprise will have any impact? If you haven't seen a Savannah Bananas play, whether it be in person or not, give it a shot. I'm a baseball person that, I mean, I think it's fun. I think it creates interest in the game. In fact, there's a player with the Brewers this year who's coming into his own. And actually, no, it might be the player. It might be the one, but it might be the White Sox rookie, Tristan Peters. Either Tristan Peters or David Hamilton of the Brewers have had they actually started with the Savannah Bananas, which is kind of cool. They'll be really becoming young stars in the league. It's fun, the Bananas. It's incredibly athletic, a lot of the kinds of things they do, but I'm kind of this old school baseball guy. But they're selling out all over. When the Bananas are coming to your city, good luck trying to get a ticket. So maybe you're right, Catherine. There might be a different way for baseball to look at the game. Baseball's changed a lot recently, trying to speed up the game in the last couple of years, and the new rules with the pitch clock. We went from having games at 3 hours to games at 2.5 hours now, meaning a lot. I mean, attention span, that kind of thing. Having young people get interested in the game. That's another thing. All
Excuse
right.
me, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Just everyone, just want to let you know, also that please give us 3 business days to send your certificates, and there are no codes. We go by the amount of time you show up as being on the Zoom attendance report. Again, please give us about 3 business days to send your certificates. And then I know that there was this other question. Thank you, and thank you. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. So Ben asked, do you think adding more teams to the playoffs will be on the table as part of the negotiation? I actually do think that's the case. I think baseball is ripe for expansion. Right now we have 15 teams in each league. It seems like the natural piece would be to expand at least by two, having 32 teams, 16 in each league. One of the things they're looking hard at is actually um, not being so devoted to a team's history with a particular league. Combinations of teams that would long-standing traditional American League teams moving to the National League side and vice versa. It's kind of interesting that they're even doing that. But one of the things that the kind of the proposal that has gotten the most ink is that there'd be matching teams in their respective cities. So the Dodgers and the Angels would be in the same division in the same league. The Cubs and the White Sox, the Yankees and the Mets. Yeah, I mean, I think we're headed that way. Let's see. There have been 0 no-hitters so far this season, and several inside the park Little League homers. There was one last night in Chicago. I say that with some remorse. A Brewers got an inside the park home run. Play is getting different. Yeah, so the question is, how's the play changed? It is changing. Bunting is now increased by 40% since 2023, which is a remarkable number. Many of you might look back at those days of Whitey Ball in St. Louis with the Cardinals in the 80s. They didn't really have a home run hitter other than George Hendrick, who could barely hit 20 home runs a year. And they just won it with team, speed, defense, base running, that kind of thing. So I think the game is changing in that respect. And actually, for me, it's for the better in that respect. Diane said the big changes to the Oakland A's have broken many hearts in the Bay Area. I'm sure it has. The the A's actually have that interesting, they originally the Philadelphia Athletics, right, many years ago, and have been stalwarts in the American League. Really, the early 70s was all about the Oakland A's and the mustache players and their fun owner and Reggie Jackson and all those players. But yeah, I'm sure it has broken many hearts. All right, is that the conclusion to our presentation?
Don't see
Don't
any
see
other
any more
questions.
questions in the chat.
I'm sorry,
Go
Anna.
ahead, Aaron.
No, I don't see any more. So, well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you so much, Ron. That was really wonderful.
Well, thank you guys. I really appreciate your attention and have a fun rest of this baseball season. And I look forward to following it with the rest of you.
Cheers,
Thank
everyone.
you so
Thanks.
much, Ron. Thank you to everyone who attended, and please keep an eye out for future programs we'll be hosting soon. Thank you.
You're very welcome.